are joined by David Robert Boxley, an artist that expresses his respect and love for Tsimshian culture through his art, cultural performance, and fantastic teaching that we've seen over at the Totem Heritage Center. And David Robert's elegant design style is drawn from a strong tradition of Tsimshian carving and design. Today he'll speak about his work in this exhibit, as well as another piece or pieces that he is inspired by or influenced by. We are very pleased to present David Robert Boxley.
Metlakatla die wil werken. Schoren ja, waar die nog waarden, nog schiet die klamas, waar die we niet door bolten, waar die we in zit. Het hebben we in zit zo we. Na die ontslooi door de Metlakatla als de kwaliek oor, die wil zo lang naar de eigen. Magic Sagoro, de wil er af met hem gooi naar eigen of de wassen. Met u gaat niet go en naar art. The Ardu and go over the Lord Tsimshian. My wife. Thank you for coming today. My name is David Robert Boxley. I'm from the Wolf Clan from Metlakatla, Alaska. My father is David Albert Boxley. He's of the Eagle Clan. My great-grandparents were Albert and Dora Bolton. I'm very honored to be here to talk to you today. I moved home to Metlakatla about 3 years ago now. To study and learn my language, and I work 5 days a week with a fluent speaker. I got to a point where I had a hard time putting my work on gallery walls down south. The little label next to it says David Robert Tsimshian. We're getting to a point where no one's going to know what Tsimshian means. What it really means when you read it. And I thought, well, what good am I doing by selling my people's art? And while I am letting that very crucial thing that makes us Tsimshian go away. So even though I'm trying to maintain an art career, now our language is taking up a lot of my time, and I'm fine with that. I am making progress, so I started off this talk in a traditional fashion. One, because it's the right thing to do, but two, I need to use my language even when no one understands what I'm saying for my own practice. I started carving when I was 6 years old. My father went to school to be a basketball coach. He majored in physical education. I used to tease him. Dad majored in PE. But he did it so he could be a coach. He came home and coached the Chiefs up in the state. And he was a coach down in Seattle for a long time. I believe every team he's ever coached went to the championships of whatever division they were in. So he was a darn good basketball coach. But we moved home when I was around the time my parents were married and I was born. And around that time, Dad had picked up oil painting. And he would paint scenes of totem poles or guys in canoes and things like that. And got interested in carving, and he bought lumber from the hardware store and got some X-Acto knives and tried replicating old totem poles from books. Metlakatla history is something that's far too involved to get in here today. The short version is my father grew up in a village where, other than the old people who spoke our language and the food we ate, there was very little left of our old culture, if anything. My father was fortunate because his grandmother and grandfather were raised in Gigi. My great-grandmother was a basket weaver. As a matter of fact, this top center basket here is one of hers. And my great-grandfather had been a canoe carver as a young man. His father was a canoe carver. And both fluent speakers of our language, so my dad grew up speaking our language in his home. He got interested in carving, and when his great-grandmother did pass in 1980, decided with his grandfather's permission that he was going to carve a totem pole and give a memorial potlatch for her. And it would be the first one in modern history for our people. And first one that there's any proof of in Metlakatla ever. And that happened in 1982 when I was a year old. So I've kind of have no choice but to be involved in all of this. And my career started off as it was something I could do with my dad. That was what it was. I remember him putting a board over my lap, and a piece of wood and a knife in my hand, and the board was so I wouldn't stab myself in the leg. I'm sure I've cut myself more times than I can count. And I have a very clear memory, one of my earliest memories of adzing a block of wood, and just chopping the heck out of it. It wasn't any good. Adzing is a hard thing to learn to do well. I sold my first mask when I was 7.
What?
My dad had been carving a totem pole at the Seattle Center for a show called Crossroads of Continents. And they actually let me carry around this sack of examples of like porcupine quills and the things that you could find in the exhibit during the show, and I got to talk to guests at 7 years old about what they were and all that kind of. I've never been shy. I made $150 for 2 masks, and I remember going to the bank and asking for all $1 bills. 7 years old,
Sure.
But that was the beginning of my career. I started selling prints in galleries when I was a teenager, 13, I think. And I was very fortunate to be named David Boxley. And Dad would take me to the gallery to introduce me to everyone that I needed to know. And it wasn't, he didn't say this in so many words, but it was, here's my son, buy his work, basically. Which is, I fully admit to that set of training wheels I had, being his son. Thankfully, my work speaks for itself, and I didn't continue to need that, thankfully. Skipping ahead here, I could talk to you for the rest of the day, so I'm going to really try to rein this in. A book came out in 2000, I think. It was published. It's called The Transforming Image, Painted Arts of the Northwest Coast. I believe that's the title, by Karen Diffick and Bill McLennan. And what they did was they did this project photographing old boxes and screens and house fronts with infrared film. And these old boxes that looked like just these old dirty brown boxes, the infrared photographer was able to show the painting underneath the patina, and all of a sudden you have all these incredible images of form line, which is what Git Hoan calls our two-dimensional art form, and now we all call it that because, going back to our languages, our traditional words for all those shapes no longer exist. That book came out, and from studying that, based on what my father taught me about how the shapes go together and all that, my work, if someone were to show my work pre-2000 and post-2000, you wouldn't think it was the same artist doing stuff. I really studied old pieces and decided that, just like with everything else in our culture, so much was taken away. And I have a responsibility to get back to an understanding of form line so that whatever comes after all that work is the natural progression that form line takes. Art changes, cultures change, everything over time adapts and moves on. But to pick up form line and try to do something new with it without understanding where it came from, I felt was terribly irresponsible. So Formline is my passion, and personally, if I could pick one thing that our people should be known for, is Formline. And sadly, it's really understood even by, I can't believe I'm saying this on camera, even by a good majority of our artists haven't pushed themselves to understand it as well as it could be understood. So I guess with that, this hide rope is a piece I created for my friend Gavin Hudson, and he graciously donated it for this show. The design represents, our story of why we use eagle down as a symbol of peace. And the short story is that during the flood, the birds felt bad for humans stranded in their canoes floating around, and the eagles, who were the chief of the birds, commanded the birds to let down their feathers. And the feathers settled on the water, and the chief of the sky decided to let the waters recede. And from then on, that's why when you see our chief's headdress dances, we shake the headdress and the eagle down comes out. That's why it's a simple piece. So this design is that, it represents that story. And my friend Gavin, who owns it, is that kind of fellow, smart peacemaker. Hide robes were something that was incredibly traditional, and then came raven's tail weaving and chokat weaving and button blankets. Actually, this little section of the exhibit is neat for that. You've got hide robe, raven's tail, chokat, button ropes. They had fallen out of use, but it's something that I made my first one around 2001, I guess. And it's something I'd like to keep creating. It's an opportunity to show Formline. It's something that's different and classic that we're able to bring back. Formline is much more than ovoids and U-forms. Too often I think we get stuck on, even though they're terribly important, we get stuck on shapes, and there's too little talk about the relationship between those shapes, which are the positive space of a design, and the negative space, which I am positive is just as important to be conscious of while creating Formline as it is drawing the ovoids and U-forms themselves. Because the negative space creates a whole new area that, if shaped correctly, can then be filled with more proper ovoids and U-forms and all the other shapes within the art. If you're not conscious of that, you end up creating these odd spaces that then those shapes don't naturally fit in. And that's terribly important. So you end up creating, everyone can come take a look at this, you can't see from where you're looking. Now, one of the examples that I want to show is this cheap, is that me?
Sorry.
Oh, that cheap design. I'm just going to make it buzz, everybody can deal with it. So, it's created first by this ovoid here. You braid that ovoid to create that line coming down, which makes this cheek area. Normally, this line would turn and become the jaw. So, I've made the bottom jaw out of the claw of the eagle. It ends up creating this, what really is kind of an awkward extended space. So I place this ovoid here. It shares this little corner of this larger ovoid. By placing that ovoid here, I have then created a U-form space here and a U-form space here. You have to break up those spaces in order to create more proper spaces. You also have to know when to stop. It's very easy in Formline to keep throwing in more and more and more. There's a great little exhibit in Vancouver once where this guy had done a video, and it was this continual zoom in on form line. It just kept coming at you. And as it went in, it got more and more complex, and it just kept getting complex. Because if you could do that in reality, you could keep filling those spaces with more and more stuff. It could go on forever. It's very much like fractals, if you've ever studied about nature and the way nature designs things. Except as an artist, you have to know when to stop. If one area is complex, if one section of these secondary elements is a certain complexity, it should be that way throughout the entire design. You don't want one area that's too heavy. That's another very important part about our two-dimensional art is balance. And it's a perfect analogy or metaphor, I always confuse which one it is, for our culture. You can't just walk into a feast hall and do whatever you want. There's protocol to how things are done. It's the same thing with form line. Too often, I think, as someone who was fortunate enough to be trained what more or less is traditional, from master to apprentice, first with my father and then with Robert Davidson, there's a process to learning, and you learn that there are things you can and can't do with the art form, not because anyone's trying to limit your creativity. Those rules are there because that's how the system works, and once you learn those rules, just like with the rules in a feast hall, you can bend and move them in a way to deal with any given circumstance. Form line is like that. If you learn the rules and those foundations, eventually you can do incredible things with it and still stay within those restrictions. It's actually one of my favorite parts about the art form. It's a continual challenge to try to do something new within that structure. And there's times where I thought, oh, I did it this time. I did it. I've never seen that before. And then I'll go study in a museum and there's an old piece with it on there. And at least I did it right. You know what I mean? At least I'm on the right track. Didn't come up with anything new, but at least, okay, I'm on it. Anyway, the other piece of mine here is this bentwood box. It also belongs to Gavin, actually. He's an excellent songwriter, and my clan and I made this, but we traded this box for a song he wrote for us. And it has his crest, a beaver on this side, the other side, an eagle. These are, for anyone who doesn't know, bentwood box is one board, curved in three corners, steamed and bent. It's a technology unique to the Northwest Coast. And they were traditionally storage boxes and furniture. There was a collector who had a bunch of my dad's boxes, maybe 8 different styles of boxes, and one of them was a big open, what museum people call bentwood bowl, because they're open and they have an undulating rim. That the guy had his firewood stacked in next to his fireplace, and that's where he kept his firewood. When he wanted to put, didn't use the box for firewood, but firewood was in it. And someone came, oh, I can't believe he's using that box like that. And my dad said, what do you think they're for? They're to keep things in. That's what they're for. It just happens that they're beautiful too. And actually, going back to formline, I believe things like this are how formline became a shared art form on the coast. It was a traded art form. When you made a bentwood box that was going to be used for trade, it would have a kind of a generic design, and that's why there's so many bentwood boxes that look almost exactly the same, at least in the formline structure. This one over here, they all have kind of the head, body, and hip ovoid construction, because you got to a village, you couldn't go sell, you couldn't predict who was going to buy the box and what their crest was going to be, so it had to be something that any chief would want and could have in their home. and I think it pushed other artists. You know, a box would come into a village, and one of their carvers would look at that and be like, "Holy smokes! You know, look at, I want to make one better than that." You know, that kind of thing. And that also goes to something that I enjoy reminding folks, that just because something might have been found in a village doesn't mean that's where it was made. And very often, my people would be hired to go create a screen or something for a Tlingit chief, or, you know, and there was all that back and forth, there was that commerce. So there's a modern question that gets asked a lot, you know, about, oh, how do you feel about selling your people's, you know, these objects? Well, we've always done that. We've always been commissioned to go do those things for somebody else. Granted, there is a difference between selling to someone who doesn't own those crests. That's where the real conversation should be. It's not about selling the work itself. Our people have been doing that for a long, long time. I'm very proud to be from Metlakatla, and as I said, any kind of Metlakatla history that I could talk to you about would take far too long. I'm already 20 minutes in here. But I would like to talk about the baskets here in the center of the room, and I might hop over to this side if that's so my people, the word Tsimshian, which is really how you say my tribe's name, comes from an older name that was Git Hoan, which means people of the Skeena River, or people who are inside the Skeena River in British Columbia. That causes an immediate assumption from a lot of people who know a little bit about our history that my village moved here in 1887 with Father Duncan. The border between Russian Alaska and British Canada was put there, and people who, like my people, who were up this way all of the time to trade or intermarried, John Reese told me that Chief Johnson was part Tsimshian. We have traditional names, a ton of little spots all around Southeast Alaska, all the way out past Prince of Wales on the ocean side. So we had to make a choice when that border was put up, which side are you going to be on? You know, this wasn't our border, it had never been a thing before. So we chose the side the Illigans were on, the Nass River. Right, we need that. We don't need you in your border. We're going to where the fish are. But so there's this misunderstanding about Tsimshian involvement in Southeast Alaska, and it's much greater than what that 1887 history is about. And all of our people were like that. There's a lot more interaction and intermarriage. These borders that we have, tribal borders and all that, I think were a lot more blurred in the old days. You know, one of the most prominent Northwest Coast carving families, the Hunts, the Kwakwakwa people, the origin of that family is half Tlingit. Mary Ebbets is their great-great-grandmother, and she's actually buried in Metlakatla, next to her father, who was a Tlingit chief, who was buried over there, that because 50 years before we moved to that island, there was a Tlingit village there. She had been married to that Kwakwakwa fellow, but wanted to be buried by her father, and they're buried on that island. So, having said all that, when we did move over, finally in 1887, meeting Metlakatlans moved over, our ladies were encouraged to continue weaving, even though so much of the rest of our culture had been suppressed by the Canadian government and the missionary, because these could be sold in his trade shop. So, weave it and sell some baskets. What happened, though, as a result, is a style that is unique to Annette Island, unique to the Tsimshian people of Annette Island. We make, and once you study it enough, you pick out a Metlakatla Alaska basket real quick. It's red cedar on red cedar basket with maiden's hair fern or canary grass false embroidery. I wish a friend of mine was here to she's a weaver and has been studying this, so she can explain a little bit better than I can. But I know that Tsimshian weaving on the BC side was done with an S twist, and we use a Z twist. There are designs that can only be accomplished with that method that we created. Again, this center large basket here is my great-grandmother's, but there's Lucy Raymond, Flora Mather, some Lillian Bukert, amazing basket weavers. And these three here are actually part of, my friends and I run a nonprofit called the Hank Foundation. Our primary goal is to create new fluent speakers of our language, but we also focus on history, art, and culture, and this is part of our basket collection. It's something I'm terribly proud of, and it's something that, despite being a carver, I will say that these style baskets, and there's more older ones actually in that case back over there. Again, if you look at these, you'll be able to spot the ones that are Tsimshian over there. These are Metlakatla's contribution to the art world. What I do is a much older art form. It came from my people 1,000 years ago, and that's all well and good. But these are iconically Metlakatla, Alaska. This came from our island, from our people after the move, and terribly proud of it. So if you have any questions about that afterward, we'll do that. The last thing, two things I'd like to show are over here. This large mass here was done by my father. He titled it Lamb. Lamb is our word for alcohol. It comes from the word rum, but we don't have an R in our language, so lamb that's what we use for alcohol. And it's to show what it does to us, both physically, but also, inside. One of the things I've been learning with the language work I've been doing, there's a new field of study called epigenetics, and they're saying, and they're still working on all of the scientific data, to compile to make it a firm science, but historical trauma, major historical trauma, meaning language loss and land loss, is such a trauma on a people that it causes genetic damage that is then passed on to offspring. What comes from that, so there's that old wives' tale about Native people being more susceptible to alcohol. They've actually disproven that. The reason for it is the trauma you go through, and here's a way to deal with that trauma is to drink your problems away. That's dull the pain. That's I believe that's where that started. Then that causes trauma by the people who are abusing that onto their families, and then a generation and a generation and a generation of all of that individual trauma packed on with that ancestral historical trauma, you're going to have some problems. And that's any minority in the world is going through some version of that. And one of the ways we've found, and what this epigenetic study is finding, is that reclaiming those things, language, history, and identity, can heal those genetic, that genetic damage even generations down the line. So let's all support everybody learning our languages. The last one I want to talk about, and I encourage everyone to take a look at the photos that are with it afterwards. This is a headdress that my father bought back in the early 80s before he was a carver, or while he was learning to carve. And it's the only piece of regalia he owned during that first potlatch I talked about earlier. There's a photo of him dancing. He has since gifted it to my friend Gavin, who has become a leader, cultural leader in our community. And the only point I really want to make is that for my people, for Alaskan Tsimshian, for us to be at a place where I'm able to speak to you in my language, or that we put up totem poles, or have potlatches, or identify as Tsimshian at all, is a real accomplishment. William Duncan, our missionary, is said to be possibly the most successful missionary in the history of missionaries. He did a real good job at what he was sent to do. To the point that, like I said, my father grew up in a village, even though there's these old Indian people who were born in the 1800s, who had been convinced that the old way was wrong, and that our language is wrong, and don't talk it. I still run into folks who are adults, older than me, said, I heard my grandparents speak, but they always told us not to. Because they've been convinced. Now we know being bilingual is actually better for students than to be monolingual. It's a terribly frustrating thing to know. All of the damage that was done. Thankfully there was. I do want to acknowledge there was a man in Metlakatla. His name is Alfred Eden, and there's a heartbreaking but a good story about when he was in school. There were many different punishments, and I don't know all of the ones that they all suffered. They're different, from soap in the mouth to your hands whipped with rulers to, he was sent out to chop wood when he was caught speaking the language. And he said, I became a real good little wood chopper because he refused to stop. And now, of the 5 fluent speakers that are left in my village, 3 are his children. And his daughter, Sarah, works with me 5 days a week. So thanks to his stubbornness, I still have a chance to know my language. And it's become more and more important to me. The last thing I want to talk about, there's a push right now, and there's a big Facebook site that's been getting a lot of recognition, at least in Canada, about fraudulent native artwork. Things people are claiming that are native made in there. Matter of fact, I've walked past a shop here in Ketchikan that has one of those Malaysian masks. It's a knockoff of a piece of mine. And sorry, sound guys. And I didn't know, growing up, I'd seen those and seen people knock off Charles Edenshaw or Robert Davidson. And there was half of me that thought, how dare they? And the other half thought, I made it. Now they're copying me. No, but it is something that needs to be addressed, I think. I think that it not only devalues the work of our own artists, it also, I'm sure those guys carving them are not getting paid anything, comparatively to what they should be getting for their work. So it's a detriment to these Malaysian carvers, wherever they're from over there, and it hurts us too. I can hang up a piece of artwork and somebody will say, well, why should I buy that when I can get that one for $150? But every time I read those posts on the internet, all I can think is, I wish all of you who are as upset about this would be as involved in learning our languages. The languages make us, Tsimshian, Haida, Linka, we all carved totem poles, we all fished for salmon, we all wove baskets, we all rode in canoes. Our languages make us unique. And I think a way to solve a lot of the other problems we have, being angry about whether non-natives are doing our work, being angry about limited to no representation in government, being angry about all these things that have happened to us. I think we could change our own perspective now that no one's stopping us anymore. If we would work on learning our languages and knowing better about who we are. And that's I think kind of my next push for whatever I'm going to contribute. I always used to, people used to say, boy, your dad, you got big shoes to fill. And I can't. Physically can't fill his shoes. He's already done all of the things he's done. It's my generation's responsibility to take up what our parents did for us and do the next thing. So they aren't shoes to fill, it's new shoes to take past where they took us. If we keep doing the same old thing, there's a quote from somebody, I don't know who said it, but they're talking about singing and dancing. They said, well, we're only imitating our ancestors. I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. I think that limits us. Our people would want us writing new songs, making new dances, doing things that are relevant to who we are today. That's always going to be how I push what I do, and it's what I think we need. I'm really happy that you've all been so attentive. I must be doing all right. So I'm going to open it up to questions. I'm happy to answer anything about anything I've talked about, and we'll see how long they let us stick around.
I would like to personally see the city of Tsimshian pass an ordinance that those shops selling the non-authentic native art. I don't know why, if I was native, I would be really angry that my culture is being ripped off by these people that are fly-by-night, stay over the summer, and all the money goes south.
That's right.
That money should stay here, and it does devalue the local native art.
It does. The extension of that, I would say, and it's something that I'm really thankful that this museum is pushing for, in its exhibit, is to include Native history mixed with Ketchikan's history. They are one and the same. It's kind of silly to separate them. But that argument to me goes, I remember Ketchikan as a little boy. Downtown was downtown. Downtown is a ghost town.
Yeah.
In the winter.
We've lost our
And it's because they've allowed these companies to buy up all that property. And Ketchikan should be doing a lot better off than it is, but local business owners don't have the opportunity to have their own shops and all that kind of thing. The native art angle is one small example of that kind of. I get that tourism is that's our industry now. Fishing isn't, logging isn't, tourism is the #1 industry in Southeast Alaska.
But that's
but it should
local people.
But it should be managed by and benefit the people who live here.
I would be all on board and be willing to work with other people from the Native community, but I myself would love to get on that and have a city ordinance passed that you cannot
I'm totally
rip
behind
on
that.
other artists,
I think
you
that's a
cannot
good idea.
sell stuff that's not from here
Yeah,
as Native work. It should not be done.
good idea. Yes, sir.
I have a question on your farm line that you started out with. Sometimes when you see a screen, it's, two sides. In other words, it looks like they did one, flipped it this way.
Yeah.
Periodically, though, or quite often, you see that there's one little ovoid or one little thing on the opposite side of half the screen that is not exactly or duplicated on the other. Why or who, or is it up to the artist, or what does that mean?
Totally up to the artist. I know that Bill Reed, very, very famous Haida artist, kind of was one of the guys that helped kickstart bringing the art back to a level of quality that hadn't been seen since before the potlatch ban and all that. He purposefully would make one side either different or wouldn't carve one little crescent or something just so that it for sure was different on both sides. Matter of fact, that row, if you ignore the center part, which is asymmetrical. From the middle out, it's the same on both sides, except for the salmon trout design in the eyes, they're different. And I just wanted them to be different. I thought, I can make them different. It's so subtle, people won't notice unless I point it out, but it satisfies me.
So it's just up to the artist.
Yeah, I think so. If there are older reasons for it on the old pieces, there's so much of that information that's just gone off. And the reason for that, the same kind of thing sort of happens. Whenever there's a big economic downturn, artists are the first ones to feel it, because art is a luxury item. You know, we always know when the economy's getting bad, about a year before everybody else feels it. In the same way, when the potlatch ban happened, and we were no longer allowed, you know, they'd come and arrest you and confiscate all of your artwork. The first people to lose out on that, and then, you know, our culture lost out on it, was that the old masters weren't needed and permitted to pass on what they knew to the next generation. That created this whole period of time, I kind of call it the dark ages of our art, where folks who hadn't learned from a master did their best to continue making our art, for whether it was potlatching in secret or selling in stores. Matter of fact, there's some few pieces in here that are from that period. And I used to, as a younger man and ignorant of as much history as I should have been, was critical of these pieces that because I was, you know, fortunate enough, my father took me to museums when I was a little boy, and I studied all these things. I saw that one wasn't the same quality as the old stuff. Well, you find out why. Because this, you know, they either had to do it in secret, or like I said, the old masters couldn't pass things on, and they did their best to carry on in between. And now I have an amazing, I mean, Casper Mather, who was a Tsimshian and a Ketchikan fixture, you know, his work is very odd if you put it next to old Tsimshian artwork. But it totally reflects what was happening to our people at the time. Therefore, it is just as valid as any old piece in a museum, to me. So I hope that answered that question and more.
Yeah, how I'd go on. Thank you, David. My question has to do with the basis of the form line design and where it came from, because I read that in a student in anthropology and archaeology that the ovoid came from the back of a skate, and I read in a book about Chinese art that the Chenong came from a Chinese axe, and another place I read that the first totem pole floated in maybe from Polynesian influence. So what are your thoughts on those areas?
I too heard a lot of theories about where those things come from. A friend of mine in Haida has a theory that the image you see, that generic image you see on a bentwood box, is a sea monster, but the sea monster is based off of rare run-ins with giant sea turtles. So, and it kind of, you know, the way it's a little bit of a far-fetched theory as far as I'm concerned. But he also says that the pattern of scales on their head is shaped like a copper shield. So there are a few things like that I'm not content with it, but I've come to accept that I just won't ever know. And I think maybe that there's also a factor in why I push myself so hard to try to understand form line as well as I do or can. It's a continuing process. One of my art teachers, I was going to be an illustrator before I decided to be a carver full-time. At first I wanted to do comic books, and that morphed into, I met a fellow who I apprenticed with when I was in high school, who had done, I don't know if you remember the movie poster for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and it's Harrison Ford standing there with a machete over his shoulder. It's one of the most famous movie posters in history, and this buddy of mine did that. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. I want to make, because I'm a big Superman fan, nerd anyway, going to see Black Panther tonight. This museum staff knows it's one of the reasons I thought about doing this today, so I come over and see Black Panther.
We have to brought in.
Yeah. So we can arrange this from now on. If some big movie's coming in, Star Wars is opening, let's get David over here. I totally lost track of what I was talking about. What was I? Oh, so it's frustrating because I want to know, and it's like I said, because the art was one of the first things that kind of had to leave in order for colonialist intentions to become a thing. There's just a lot that we're not going to know. And it's why I think I pushed myself so hard to know form lines, so that while I can't explain why those things are there, you know, why an ovoid is shaped the way it is, or why things connect a certain way, I can at least know how they do it. And I've really tried to push myself to understand it. So, yeah, there's a lot of things like that, culture that I wish there was a time machine that I could just go ask. I just want to know, so that, you know, and we can just keep guessing, I guess, you know.
So I wanted you to finish your story about your friend and the illustrator and
Oh,
all that.
Well, he, over 3 years working with him, I got a great portfolio together. One of the things he taught me that stayed with me, even though I'm not doing that kind of artwork now, at least not, I do in my spare time, I still sketch and do portraits and that kind of thing. But he told me you have to be a lifetime student. The minute you stop learning, you stop growing, and you know, you get stuck. And there are a whole lot of artists, and I know some of them are probably going to watch whatever video is being taken of me right now, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's too many artists, and I'll say Northwest Coast Native artists, who get to a point that's good enough to sell their work and pay their bills, and they stop. And the art, while it is much more prevalent and prolific than the language and other parts of our culture are, I don't believe that it's safe if you compare everything that's produced today to the quality of the old pieces in the museums. I think as a whole, there's more we can do to raise the bar of the art form. And if it's as simple as saying that, you know, you have to be a lifetime student. Like a great example I was talking about earlier today, John Hudson, who's a carver in Metlakatla, there's some pieces of his over here. His father is Jack Hudson. He went and studied whistles, old Tsimshian whistles, in museums, and taught a whistle class through the Totem Heritage Center, and I took it. I think I am a good carver, but I didn't know how to make whistles, so I wanted to go learn how to make whistles. And I think society in general would be better off if everybody decided that there's more to know than what we already think we know. Yes, ma'am.
So, do you go to places like the Smithsonian and the University of British Columbia and look at their collections?
A couple weeks I'm going actually to Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria to do some study.
Do they let you like open the drawers and look at the stuff that they don't have on display?
Yeah, museums have gotten better. In my lifetime, I watched from going with my dad as a little boy, where it was, okay, put these gloves on, and you can point at it, but we'll really be the ones moving it and showing it to you, you know.
Yeah.
So if my dad wanted to measure something, they had to flip it over and hold the ruler where he wanted it, and you know, that kind of thing. Nowadays, thankfully, most museums have gotten to the point where it's like, here's your gloves, go for it. And my dad, last time we went to the Smithsonian together, stood up and told this conservation staff at the Museum of American Indian, he said, all this stuff belongs to us, and you're just taking care of it.
Yeah, well, I
You know,
was out there
so,
at
right,
the Smithsonian,
Yeah.
and I was shocked at how little from our area
yeah.
is on display.
Well,
I mean, your father's
right,
got a big piece in the entrance.
the Museum of Natural History used to have an incredible Northwest Coast art exhibit.
Yeah.
And when the Museum of American Indian opened, I think they must have thought, well, there's a whole museum for that now. So they remodeled that section. I don't know if it's gonna go back up. I wish it would, because it was really amazing. And I know I was disappointed. This is gonna sound, I try never to sound, like I talked about that, the anger about all these things, it's a bum thing to focus on things to be angry about. Well, they built that museum on this little triangle piece of land, and then designed it with a whole bunch of these. It's an amazing building that's really misusing the space available to it. There's a lot of open, empty space and nothing there. I was hoping the Museum of American Indian opened, it was going to be a whole floor of Northwest Coast stuff, and then there'd be another floor of all Southwest stuff, and there'd be another, you know what I mean? That was what I was hoping for. And while it's an honor, I got to work on that pole dad's that's there. You know, it's kind of like, no. We got a pretty building, and, you know, we can give a finger to the Capitol building across the street. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, that's all that really, you know.
But there's that whole section that's, it's listed on the program as See Alaska.
Right.
And there's no art in there.
Yeah, it's.
There's no art.
I have a hard time with that. And well, and the majority.
It can change.
Oh, sure. And things are slowly getting better. You know, the majority of amazing Northwest Coast art, for as much as there is that's still on this continent, they're all over in museums in Europe. You know, the bulk of the stuff that was taken away is all
There's some in
overseas.
Chicago.
Yeah, well, and like I said, there's a lot. Ottawa, their national museum, it's the Canadian Museum of History, has an incredible Northwest Coast art collection. I remember being in awe. I walked in there with my dad into their archives collections, and you know, these stacks of shelves that go down, you know, it looks like forever, and just rows of bentwood boxes and rows of masks, and to know that there are so many museums like that. You know, I always have to remind people, you know, it's too easy to think of Native people the way Western culture has made people think of us, you know, as these primitive people. Matter of fact, there's a book, I think, by Franz Boas, or somebody called Primitive Art, and it just drives me nuts. You don't create that much art of that high quality if you are wondering what you're going to eat tomorrow. You know, we had developed a sophisticated culture. The only reason there aren't History Channel shows about us and you know, movies and all that stuff is because everything that we made was of wood, and it all went back into the earth. You know, if we still had villages, stone villages in place, like you can go down Chichen Itza and all those places in Mexico, we'd be thought of like these grand empires. I think the Northwest Coast qualifies as one of those types of societies. The ancient Egyptians, the Mayans and Aztecs, and the Northwest Coast, I think, are totally on par. Yeah, I'm biased. Any other questions? I really could talk all day, yes, sir.
Your people that live on the other side of the border down
Yeah.
here, and I've been to the old Metlakatla and up to the Nass and places and stuff, villages like that.
Yeah.
Do they still try to, or are they into as much as language and culture of retaining it or bringing it back or doing anything with it?
There are pockets of it. The amount of, like I said, there's so much focus on these other things, and I wish language was priority number one. I don't know what we're going to do when there's nobody. Well, my whole goal is that there won't be nobody, but you know, nobody to speak our languages and tell that history with, the language carries it's like the stamp of legality. You know, that you can say it and explain it in your language in the words that were first ever uttered about those things, gives you a certain validity that once we all lose that, you know, what are we gonna do? How can we be a tribe of people that aren't just another group of Americans if we lose that thing that makes us that? There's been some fluent speakers we brought over to help us because our dialect is more or less exactly the same as quite a few of the coastal Tsimshian villages on the other side. There's little like accent differences, but it's the same language. The Niska, Giksan, they speak the same root language, but they're completely different dialects. One of those fluent speakers said about what's going on in Metlakatla, and there's actually some other small groups of Tsimshians in other places. There's a great group in Juneau who are really trying to learn the language. They don't have a fluent speaker, but they meet every weekend to talk with each other. It's really something. Anyway, this fluent speaker said, we don't have a bunch of young folks like you on the other side that are fighting for this. And I said, I think a good part of it is we're so, it's a hard thing to talk about, it's a hard thing to admit, but I think admitting it is something we all need to start doing. We're so hurt and misguided as a people because of everything that happened to us. That the answers that we are looking for, the fixes to our problems aren't, they're right in front of us if we would just take them. And like I said, it's our language and our history and all of that. And this is going to show how nerdy I am. Has anybody ever read The Lord of the Rings books? Okay. The elves talk about themselves and they say that they're suffering the long defeat. They know that they know they're going to lose. They know they've got to leave Middle Earth at some point. But they're going to fight and fight and fight until it has to happen. And there are days that I feel like that's what we're doing. That somehow, someday, it'll be gone anyway. But we're going to fight like hell while we're here to try to stop that.
Because we're warriors.
Yeah.
But you're leaving a lot behind.
Well, yeah, and
to inform.
But see, and that's so many people think when they come to see an exhibit like this. And one of the best things about this exhibit is it's alive. You know, it's real. There's old stuff here, but there's new stuff here too. And the pictures of us doing what we do now is so important. Because so many exhibits even now you walk into exhibits. They're finally remodeling the Natural History Museum in New York's Northwest Coast Art Gallery. You know, but up until recently, you walk in there and you'd think, just like an exhibit of the ancient Mayans or something, that this culture no longer exists. You know, and here's what's left of this. You know, and we're over here like, hey, you know, what are you talking about? So. You know, but one of the things, it's kind of hard to talk about, but it's another thing that is a result of everything that happened to us. My mother is from Seattle. I'm English, French, German, and Swedish on her side of the family. I've been really fortunate to get to give presentations at Purdue and Berkeley, and you know, I've like I said, I've never been shy. You put me in front of a group of people, I'll talk. But I'm also aware that I have some benefits from how I look. We live in a society that is constructed around, and I don't mean this to offend anyone, I hope I don't, around the idea of Caucasian supremacy. I mean, that's how the Western world was built. And so maybe I'm able to stand up in front of people, like I said, not necessarily you people, but the opportunities I've had in my life, to say the things I say, and maybe it's taken better because of how I look. I'm very aware of that. And, you know, the flip side of that is I've also had to prove to my own people that I'm one of them. You know, the things like blood quantum and all of that. If I can remove myself and look at blood quantum objectively, or from the point of view of the people who instigated it, it's genius. From their perspective. Whoever thought of that they were on the ball, man. You know, for the mission of eliminating the Indian problem. Blood quantum, that's what it's there for. Eventually we breed ourselves out. You know, there was a time where unless you gave up your native status, you couldn't vote, you couldn't do all, you know, all these things.
Don't be afraid to name it, it's genocide.
Yeah, and you know, we're the only people on Earth that have to prove who we are by this percentage, which is a bunch of baloney. You know, the old people didn't think that way. There's a great old story I was reading. The Tsimshian boy was captured by some Haidas and taken over to Haida Gwaii, and the chief of the people who took him thought so much of this young man that he was going to adopt him as his nephew to be next in line to be the chief of his house. Well, that says to me, well, I'll give you another example first. William Bainan, who was an informant for anthropologists to help write down our stories and things. He worked with Marius Parvo. He was half Caucasian. I don't know what the ancestry on his father's side, but his mother was Tsimshian and Niska. And he ended up becoming a chief. So it says to me that our people didn't think about what damn color your skin is. But that system being imposed on us has caused us to fight amongst ourselves as if the amount of blood in you makes you more valid, more Tsimshian, more whatever, than somebody else. And that's on purpose. That's to make us fight each other instead of standing up for the right thing to do. I've become a lot more political as I've gotten older. And I don't know how much more we should go into that, but again, there are things that need to be said, I think, but they should be said in a way that we acknowledge where we're coming from, we understand what happened to us. I don't want to go at these topics angry and ready to blame the people that I'm talking to for what happened 100 years ago. What I want changed is the system that persists to today that was created then to change. It's not about blame. It's about what can we do to make this better. That's what we need.
So I'm curious how it feels for you that Metlakatla is the only Indian reservation in Alaska.
Yeah.
So how does that make it a different experience for you than for somebody who's...
The one thing I'll say, and I'm hoping this deal goes through now that they're talking about that, like KIC will actually get some land. And, you know, there's all these landless tribes.
Yeah.
Our council back...
But those are corporate lands. They're
Well,
not a reservation.
believe me, I know. Our council back in the 70s, I think because of our history, and see, we left Canada not just because the church came in to overthrow Duncan and take over the mission. the Canadian government said, well, you're only 3/4 human, you can therefore not own land. So we wanted to go somewhere where we were in control of our future. That's, you know, even though the land we were leaving had been ours for a lot longer than people say. I mean, even they're rewriting the history all the time. That whole land bridge 10,000 years ago is being pushed back and back all the time. You know, it's probably more like 40,000 years that we've been here. So when it came around to this Settlement Act, our council was like, no, we're fine. This is ours, and that's good. We're the only reservation, I believe, I could be wrong, but that was established by act of Congress. Most of them are treaty, treaties that were signed. And we got it because we were a Christian community. You know, in 1887, you're still reaching just the end of the wars in the plains between the United States government and Native peoples down south. You know, Chief Joseph hadn't given his famous "I will fight no more forever" speech yet. So it makes you think, why on earth would the United States government let more Indians into the country? Well, they made a real effort not to even call us Indians when they were doing the dealings. You know, we were the Metlakatlans. You know, we were this Christian community. And that's why we got let in. So, you know, there's a certain part of you that wants to be, you know, as a Metlakatlan, to be very grateful to the United States for giving us this island where we're coming from. They didn't want us to have anything at all. The flip side, knowing that we wouldn't have made it in if we had still been practicing our traditions. You know, they never would have let us have it. I also go at this from some friends of mine from Yakutat. I spent a lot of time in Yakutat. I was adopted up there. I have a Tlingit name. It's an amazing place, Yakutat. If any of you have never been, Yakutat is an amazing place. But they tried to go, or at least a portion of their population wanted to fight to become a reservation during the whole Settlement Act. And the government, this guy was telling me, the government showed them, well, here's what you get if you have a reservation. And it showed them the poorest reservations in the country. You know, they didn't bring them to Metlakatla, who at the time was doing quite well. Self-sufficient, you know, the mill and the cannery was going full bore. We were doing all right. And Yakutat, who, their history, forgive me, any of you Yakutat people who may ever watch this video, if I get any of this wrong, but the Russians who occupied their territory were beaten. The Yakutat Tlingits got together and beat the Russians out. They left and they never came back. Now in Sitka that happened, but then the Russians came back and, you know, stayed for a while anyway. That didn't happen in Yakutat. They pushed them out and they were gone. That seems to me that section of land, the traditional territories of the Yakutat people, should not have been included in the sale of Alaska to the United States because the Russians didn't control that area. So I've told them, why don't you fight for that? Why don't you get all of your land back? There's a whole big corner, this whole big section of southeast is all Yakutat tribal land, originally.
But they didn't. They
decided, at the time, they decided that's what they were going to do. You know, we're going through this now, trying to fight for fishing rights. Again, there's this misunderstanding that we only showed up in 1887 to this area, which is just wrong. You know, same thing with the Haidas. The Haidas just appeared in the 1700s up here. This is ridiculous. And you know, trying to explain that we can't just fish in our 3,000 feet that the government gave us out from shore. That was meant only for us, that other commercial fishers and stuff can't come in and fish our water. Salmon don't just swim within a 3,000-foot boundary that no one can see. You know, we should have an expanded area of traditional fishing rights. We've got, like I said earlier, we've got traditional names for all this area. The first sawmill on Gravina was a Tsimshian-run sawmill. And I will not make this a firm claim, but I have looked through several old documents combined with oral history that I've heard that Gitspan is a Tsimshian word. Like I said, I'm not stating that as I know for a fact, but I've run into a lot of examples of that, and one of the recent ones said that you know, the Ketchikan is an Indian word that's talking about, it refers to the fish in the creek after they've spawned. You know, they're all laying out.
Dead fish.
Dead fish. You know, that's where it comes from, and that's what our old people said what Ketchikan means. You know, very firmly, that's what, you know, we knew to be. And like I said, Chief Johnson was part Tsimshian, and that goes back to, again, this idea of firm borders and nations of people. You know, even the term Tsimshian wasn't we weren't a nation. Every village was its own autonomous state. You know, my great-grandfather's people were the Git Hoan, the people of the Kelp. And they had certain territories that were theirs, and rights and privileges and crests that belonged to that tribe of people who happened to be, later on, you know, we call it, oh, we're Tsimshian, well, so are they, they're Tsimshian too. You know, but they were Git Hoan, and that was the height of their identity. You know, they weren't Tsimshian, we're Git Hoan. You know, that's what they would say. So, how I feel about all this is so complicated. The whole thing is so complicated, and it. But if we don't, the frustrating thing is we have to learn how to attack these problems or these issues, simultaneously protecting what we know to be our traditional rights and privileges and our own history, the way we know our history. But also at the same time fight it through the system of government that's here, and we have to deal with this monstrosity of bureaucracy that has kept us where we're at. You know, we constantly have to have a foot in both worlds if we're going to say, you know, I practice my culture. Well, I practice it with this side, and then I got to pay my taxes. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yep.
And it's a lot more work. There's times I'm envious of people who live in a society that it's their culture that's the predominant culture. What an amazing thing that must feel like, you know. And talking about Black Panther, you know, there's all these African American people who are like, finally, there's a movie that we can go to that's a big blockbuster superhero movie, and the people look like us. You know, there's a great video of these black folks, and they're saying, is this what it feels like? You know, to go and there's a superhero and it looks like you? You guys get to have this all the time. You know, we never get to. And that's how it is for any minority, is that waiting for. One of the biggest problems with today, I think, and it permeates through every part of Western culture, is this idea that equality means the people in power losing something. What are they losing? All we're asking for is to be treated the same. You're not losing anything. And I think there's that fear that somehow, that if we get the same thing that everybody else gets, that, you know, maybe all of a sudden minorities will come into power and white folks will be sent to pick cotton. You know, I think some people must be afraid of that, and if they would just understand, we don't want revenge, we just want equality. That's it. It's not anything big. God. Yes, ma'am.
That afraid that the brown people are going after revenge, but it's not gonna happen.
No, that's not, yeah, not that I should speak for every minority, but I'm pretty sure that's not what we want.
No, it's not equality, but, so, the Metlakatla natives can't fish in, I thought we had to stay out of their waters, but they could fish wherever.
Well,
Yeah,
originally
you
I
guys can
believe
actually
that was the idea, and the old people, before Fish and Game was so on everything, we'd fish up and down, you know, our old guys used to pack up, and the whole fleet would go up to, like, Kodiak, and,
I know my dad was good friends with Bert Van, he used to
Yeah.
fish
right,
everywhere.
and there was a time just recently where, thankfully, we talked to the Coast Guard about it, where, you know, our guys would set our nets, and the tide would drift us out past the 3,000-foot marker, and we'd get a ticket, you know, for, you know, that kind of thing. The line was meant to
I thought it
keep
was meant to keep
commercial
us out.
fishermen and, you know, other people out. That's our little bit of water. It was never meant to contain us.
Yeah, I always thought
In
it
that.
was
The
under
state
assumption
doesn't
that you could
regulate
fish
anything in the
our waters.
reservation or any of their waters.
No,
So that's why when you cross
but that
over
second you
into the
drift
state
over the line
land.
on accident.
Yeah, Dale knows all about that right now.
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
I was under the assumption that you guys could fish, when did they change that?
Boy, I don't know when it changed, but it's something we're trying to address with the state and the government right now.
So speaking of cultures and you can't do stuff, if I want to hunt seal, I have to go back to Norway to do it. Anyway,
Yeah,
but to
there's-
get back to the language thing, have you thought of like implementing in the Metlakatla School District
Oh yeah,
language
we have,
for the little kids
yeah.
that are 5 when you actually learn language?
yes, we
Is
have
there a
that.
possibility of doing that?
We have that. This is the problem that we run into though. With 5 fluent speakers, one is in his 90s, 4 are in their 70s. They don't have the physical ability, nor should they have to, chase a bunch of little kids, you know, all day at school. So that means my generation has to get off our butts and do it. But you can't do that well and actually get them to learn the language if you're not able to immerse them in it. And none of us are capable enough in the language to do that for them, to provide that environment. So the focus right now, and I wish every tribe would do this, because I know it's, you know, people see their little kids and they can say a phrase or some words and oh, it's cute. But if we don't create, this is what the Hawaiians and the Maoris did. If we don't create young adult fluent speakers first, we're really screwed.
I saw some movie thing, I can't remember if it was on Netflix or on PBS or something, where there was a film being made down in Queen Charlotte's.
Yeah, Haida Gwaii, they're making a whole
With the
film
language
in
and
Haida.
that, yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
That's pretty cool to do with the other languages.
I think it might come from one of their oral history, I believe.
So is there anybody with like, okay, now the old language is all the old stuff, like, but now all there's this modern stuff, the computer age, all that.
We're
Is there
making new
anyone
words.
that's making new words?
Yeah, thankfully, I don't know about the other languages, but Somalia is set up to, there are connective words that help you create a word for something to explain what it is. What's a good example? Okay, this is an old word, but it's a good example of it. To paddle, the verb to paddle a canoe is wai, W-A-A-Y, wai. That's to paddle a canoe. So the thing you use to paddle is hawai. Ha means the thing that you use to, and whatever it's connected to. A bath towel. So it starts with ha. Segunt, to make dry, tchatmo, your body. Ha segunt tchatmo, that's a bath towel. Halitamism nachno is a computer. It literally means a supernatural writing table. So yeah, we're trying to, there's a word.
Cell phone, you got a word for?
Right now, we just say little telephone. We're working on that. Because there really are more than phones. And that's where we get stuck all the time. Is there? Yeah.
And the language is like being written too.
Oh yeah, we have dictionaries, there's
online.
tons of, there's books, there's lots of material. There's nobody talking. I mean, except there's a few of us, and I'm very proud of Metlakatla. There's myself, Gavin Hudson, Candy McGill, we run the Hike Foundation, and we're doing the work we're doing. Jen McCarty, who's another young adult learner, she's a teacher at the elementary school, and she tries her best to put Somali into everyday things for the kids in her class. She's doing great. There's David Nelson, Naomi Lease, there's Franklin Dundas. There's this group of us, people my age, who are really trying. And there's fluent speakers who are helping each of us. You know, we don't all go work with all of them, but they're spread out among the learners. So I'm very proud of us for that. There's not enough of us. You know, like right now over in Prince Rupert, the all-native basketball tournament is going on. When basketball happens, nothing else can happen. And I think that's true in any native community. There's nothing more important than basketball.
It's like football in Texas.
And for me, it's frustrating because actually I love basketball. My father was a basketball coach. He was my basketball coach. Basketball is one of the greatest sports ever invented. It's a full body, strategic, amazing sport. And I find myself hating it. Because it gets in the way of what's truly important. If it was treated for the game that it is, the sport that it is, and left in that place, I'd probably go all the time. But when it's more important than a feast, or it's more important than a council meeting, or it's more, you know, when it becomes more important to a parent that their kid has made the grades to play ball, or that they're getting equal time out on the court, when that's more important than the kid's education, that really bothers me.
It would be really cool if you had like a working village and make money off it from the darn tourists that come here, and have the language spoken there. And it would be jobs where they would, you would have a job if you spoke the language.
I've got those plans in my head. I need to either win the lottery or, you know, somebody needs to.
Seems like there must be some huge government grant out there somewhere.
Well, and that's one of the problems with the language, with the grants that are available. So many of them are for documenting the language, so creating dictionaries, you know, recording. None of them, so far that I've seen, are free rein. Here's some money to hire apprentices and masters wherever they are. So if you have to go to British Columbia to be with them, whatever, this is for you to go spend every day learning that language until you're fluent. That's the grants we need. That's what we need. Somebody to say, here, go save your language. You know, we got dictionaries. There's a talking Somali dictionary. You can go online, look up a word. Most of them have sound files. You click it, it'll say it. Oh, awesome. We need to be talking to each other. And I think, for as amazing as our art is, I guarantee that if we're able to create an increase in fluent speakers and our own people have a better understanding of who we are, the art that will be created from that, after that, will put all this to shame. Because there's a pride you feel when you're able to speak your language that you just don't have otherwise. And I got a lot of work to do. You know, I mean, it's thankfully it's not all on my shoulders, but my dad talks about it, and his grandfather said, you know, you feel that. He said, it's a good weight. You know, it's a good thing you're doing, so that weight to carry, it's all right to carry that weight. It's lonely at times, you know, because there's not enough of us doing it. And there's not enough support from it, both from our own people and the local municipalities or governments that, you know, that we rely on or partner with. You know, it's even my own people, you know, I'll say it because it's true. You know, there's a lot of lip service paid to how important the language is. oh, that's, I always get this, and I appreciate their support, but, it's so good what you're doing, learning our language. So good. Keep it up. Well, I want to say back, what are you doing to help me? Why aren't you learning it too? I know it's hard, but one of the things that always keeps me going is there's a story, there was a native man in California, his people's language was dead. There were no more fluent speakers. There was lots of books and recordings and stuff of these old people. He made an effort every day, no matter where he went, no matter who he spoke with, to say what he wanted to say first in his language, and then he translated in English, and every day, wherever he got stumped, he'd study those things, and eventually he became fluent in his language all by himself. Now, I don't want to have to work that hard. So we're trying, while we still have speakers left, to have, so we have people to talk to. But if that guy could do it, we just as a people have to decide that it's important. And again, like I said, with my people, we have a lot to come back from. And it took, it was 120 years from the time we left with the missionary to establish Metlakatla, BC, to the time of the first potlatch in Metlakatla, Alaska. 120 years. So it's probably going to take that long, from 1982, from when this happened, for us to get back to, if we can keep pushing it. There was I told you guys, you got to just stop me at some point. There's this research that was done in the 80s about when languages were expected to die, when the native languages lost. And Somalia was 2015 was their guess. They're not far off. It's dying. Until I become fluent, and a group of young people who are working so hard, until we become fluent, it's not safe. And even then it's not safe, because then, once we're fluent, we have to keep talking to each other and teach the next generation who are, they're going to be the ones to... So until we have 3- and 4-year-olds who are fluent in the language, we're in... it's on life support. That's where we're at. And while our art and our visual culture, singing and dancing and all that, is so prevalent now. Everywhere you go, there's half a dozen dance groups in Metlakatla. Every night of the week, the Longhouse is booked because each group has their practice night. None of that's going to matter if our language is dying. That's a hard thing for me to accept, because my father and family have been involved in making sure all this stuff is happening at all. But there's more to it than singing and dancing. There's more to it than totem poles. And there's the way we treat each other, the way we acknowledge each other's history, family ties that, Metlakatla used to, we called us the little community under one roof. That was how the radio used to refer to us. Well, now, we've become all of these nuclear families. People who doors used to be open. My dad said when he was a little boy, the constant in and out of relatives, people from BC, people from all over, grew up, in and out of each other's homes. It doesn't happen anymore, because the knowledge of why those connections existed aren't honored the way they were before. It goes back to, God, we got a lot of work to do. And to me, it's all connected with the loss of that language. By the 70s and 80s, and now, the kids, the little ones who are growing up now, they don't hear the language spoke. I did when I was a little boy. I heard the old people talk. They don't hear that now. So it's even harder for us to get these younger people to want to participate, because they don't get why they should. Meanwhile, I remember my great-grandfather was alive till I was 10. He was born in 1894. And I just treasure that I had this relationship with this old guy. He was a good, strong Christian man, helped build the town hall at home, and that's another thing. Back then, all the buildings in Metlakatla were all built by the community for free. Everybody just got together and built them because we needed them. We needed them as a people. I think Western civilization has ruined that part of humanity.
Yep.
That we're not a people. It's you and me, and I'm over here, and you stay away from my stuff. You know, that's American culture. So, but we can change it if we want to. So let's change it, right? I mean, gee whiz, what's the alternative? Keep putting up with this? No, thanks. You know what? I want that time back. I want to be able to, for my people to get together and know we can do anything. You know, too often it's when somebody dies. That's when it's amazing what happens in Metlakatla. If somebody dies, everybody is there to help. There's a meal ready after the service. The people who lost their loved one don't have to do anything because everybody gets together and does it for them. And I always have to tell us, what if we were like that all the time? What could we accomplish? And what could society in general accomplish if we were like that all the time?
You could have rebirth of language ceremonies instead of a funeral, it could be rebirth
Right.
of something.
Well, and you know, maybe if it expanded to, I'm going to leave you with this. I'll end it myself since no one's stopping me. A couple of years ago in Metlakatla, our nonprofit put on a dinner that was meant to harken back to these big dinners we used to have at the town hall in Metlakatla, where all ladies would bring out their fine china, and each lady was in charge of a table, her table. You know, her china would be on that table, and everyone would come in the community and have a big dinner, whether it was a dance or councilman's ball or whatever, you know, whatever it was. Everyone would dress up, get all the old time guys I loved, they all looked like gangsters, with big trench coats and hats and three-piece suits. Man, they looked good. So we wanted to have this kind of formal dinner to remember that part of our history too, because that's just as much a part of our history as anything. And so we had this big event, and for one of the gifts, because we were going to tell the town history, I'd do a presentation about Metlakatla history, but I'd love to give here sometime. And we gave away this painting. My teacher who had taught me when I was in school about illustration, he did a painting for us, and it's from a photo of our pioneers, the guys who came, called them the pioneers, who came over for BC, about 50 of them on a rope, pulling the stumps of trees out by hand, you know, to clear the lot, to clear the town for building. And Alfred Eaton, the fellow I spoke of earlier, had given a speech in 1987 about those guys pulling on ropes together, and that's how we did it. And that's what's wrong with us today. We don't pull together. So we wanted to remind people of that, because what a good thing to say, you know, that we should pull. So we did this painting, we handed it out. Well, Byron Malott, who I think had just become lieutenant governor at the time, was there, and we gave him one. And he took it and he gave it to the governor. Well, since then, if you listen to a good chunk of the governor's speeches, time and time again, he used to reference us by name, Metlakatla, but he says if we could just pull together. That comes from that print that we gave to the lieutenant governor, and the governor thought so much of it that he's used it as a rallying cry for the state cooperating, you know, the Senate cooperating with each other and all that, to get something done. And we're so proud of that. Every time you know, whether or not I agree with every policy he puts out or not, I'm really proud of that. And that's what drives me, anyway. And it's how I feel about Metlakatla, that's my heritage, that idea of that unified effort to do something good. And I'm going to keep working, and I hope to do more talks like this with y'all, and I appreciate your time and your attentiveness. Like I said, I hope I haven't bored you. I feel like being here was something that I should do, and I really want to thank the museum and its staff. They're fantastic, and I want to make a public thank you while you guys are all standing here, that Metlakatla is so proportionally represented in this exhibit, and I know will be in the permanent exhibit. My people have and have had an impact on the history of Ketchikan, you know, even now today, Ketchikan's economy is aided by Metlakatla's spending our money over here. So it means something to us to be represented, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
So you're gonna be back tomorrow? To talk?
We take you.
No, well, we'll see. I don't have a lot to do tomorrow. We'll see. But I appreciate everybody coming.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So,